Freezing Amsterdam. Well, actually, freezing is a relative term, but I think that we can all say that if you can see your breath when you're walking down the street at noon, it's pretty cold out. So, for freezing Amsterdam, Wednesday night hump. Good to be here. Good to be here live. How is everybody doing out there? While we wait for more people to show up here in the live stream, I shall attempt to talk about things that happened here at Upstairs to the Right Music Studio this week. Not I Mr. Watson in the house. Hey, how you doing, sir? Welcome. Not a lot, guys. I have to be honest. I have been so busy with my new business that, quite frankly, it's taken up a great deal of my time every day. And on top of that, other things that I'm chasing down as well. So, not a lot of cool things to talk about, unfortunately. Not a lot in the guitar department either, unfortunately. But um, again, sometimes busy is a good thing. It makes you focus on the things that are important at the moment. But I will not neglect, of course, being here live for you guys every Sunday and Wednesday night. So you pretty much will count on that. Any other content other than that for the time being, yeah, we'll see. There is something I really would like to share with you guys. I'd like to shoot and share with you guys. I hope to get to it this weekend. We'll see. We'll see. Actually, here this weekend, they're predicting snow again. So I, I might just that might just be a good thing to do to stay in a home project. So we'll see anyway. So that's what I have in mind. I do want to shoot regular content for the channel. I've been neglecting that for quite a while now. That may go forward a little bit more in the future. We'll see. But in any case, the live streams will continue, guys. Here. What else? I got um, just a quick update. I got an email from the CD printer today. I'm next up in the queue, and he is going to. I'll put my stuff here and get it to me here. I am waiting for some other parts and components to come in together so I can put a complete package together that's to my satisfaction. That I think is quality. But with the me being next in queue to get printed, that's half the battle done. So if you guys have some guys have pre-ordered. I appreciate that. As soon as everything comes together, which shouldn't be very much longer, I think it'll be pretty much on time. The schedule that I set in Bandcamp, maybe even a little bit before, since he put me ahead of the queue. I think it's because I have such a small order. He just wanted to get it out of the way. But you can look forward to that. And as soon as that's done, hopefully we'll get those out. Mike Watson says we're expecting a big snow also. Yeah, it's going to be lovely. It's a real winter this year for sure. But that's okay. I have two dogs, May and Hoshi, as you know. And the most important thing is making sure I get them a decent walk when it snows here. May, she does not care. May will just, she'll plow through the snow because she's a pup. But Hoshi's a little older, so I gotta kind of watch out for her. Too cold to snow here, Scott says. Minus 20 and minus 50 tonight in Newfoundland. That's why I said cold is a relative thing. See, remember, I started out by saying that kind of with you in mind, Scott, to tell you the truth, because nothing that is ever going to hit here is ever going to come anything close to what's hitting up there with you. So, although I do have friends in Japan who are telling me that it's getting pretty cold in Sapporo too, like that. So yeah, it's a real winter. Ben Allmark in the house. How you doing, sir? Welcome, welcome. Glad to have you here. So anyway, so that's an update on the CD. It's definitely happening. I'm, it's weird. It's really hard. I pulled out my CD-ROM drive because I was going to burn a few myself, but that for some reason it's crapped out on me. But I had to do a lot of research to find a place that was, reasonable in terms of their pricing and were willing to do that kind of output. They're really making it hard for the independent artists out there to do this kind of thing. I remember back in my Singapore days and my in my Japan days when getting this kind of work done was not that difficult and not that expensive, and the quality was pretty good. I share with you some of my CDs and for my collection. So that's the level of quality that I want, and I'm kind of putting that together. It looks like it's going to work out. I'm so I'm so relieved because I that I've got to get this project completed and get this stuff together. So that's a good thing. But that kind of leads into what I want to talk about tonight. They really have made it difficult. Stella, hey, how you doing? Welcome. Um, I'm in the same civil latitude as Paris, France. Low. Yeah, yeah. That's weird. How that works, being the latitudes and the variations in weather in those latitudes, same latitude. Um, there's two nails, in my opinion, that doomed not just rock music. I've titled it "The Two Nails That Doomed Rock Music." Tonight's discussion, but I think it doomed. Interesting enough, it doomed R&B as well. That's a mind-blowing thing to say, but it's true. I've actually thought about it. And I want to talk about that tonight. I want to talk about how that happened, why that happened, and why it is so difficult these days for independent. It's getting worse and worse. If my experience putting this CD together is any experience, and I'm pretty resourceful, and I have people I can call and ask questions with. But if you didn't have that resource, boy, they're really making it tough. And um, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about those two nails that destroyed rock and R&B. Now, when I say R&B, this stuff that they call R&B now is not R&B. I think you guys know that. It's pretty and the same thing obviously goes for rock. What's being passed off for rock these days is not it. I saw that Scott earlier in the chat was talking about bringing back true punk bands and that culture. And we're going to get into that. I think that those were good points that Scott was bringing up there. Um, Rock bands used to cut their teeth in cities. It was a city that made a group, like Kiss with Motor City, Detroit, and you know what is that, the what do they call him, the Madman? Anyway, so many groups. Kiss certainly benefited from Detroit. Kiss really, really blew up because of Detroit. Um, and hold on, let me type that in because that's going to bother me. I have Ted Nugent. Don't know why I blanked on Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent, Motor City Madman. Obviously, somebody that benefited from being connected with the city because that city is what made that artist or that act. It was cities. And a lot of these cities in the United States from the 70s up through the early 90s were making these bands were, Midwest cities like Chicago, St. Louis, Cleveland, places where rock was built, basically. And those cities were the engines of the genre. They were the engines of the genre. Those were the places that people bought the records and Ted Nugent sold a lot of records, back in the day. And he did that built off of the strength of his association with the city and the city that supported him. Um, and so not just him, but other rock groups as well. Boston, with Boston. That's an easy one. I'm sure you guys can think of similar groups down in the chat that benefited from a particular city. This was not just regulated to just the states. The UK had a lot to do with that as well. Um, there were certain areas, like for example, with Queen, that really were getting heavy airplay. Bon Jovi, good one, good one. Springsteen, good one. So we can see this, that these cities were the engines behind these rock, the rock genre. And I will say that with R&B, you know, Philly, we all know the Philly sound. If you've ever, listened to a Teddy Pendergrass album, give me a dark room, a pretty girl, and a Teddy Pendergrass album, and I can go to town. You know the Philly sound, right? Very popular. Motown, the Motown sound. And Atlanta, which wasn't as a big of a deal then as it is now, but it was big enough that a lot of R&B groups came out of there, and a lot of the other St. Louis, a lot of most of the places, Cleveland, with the Daz Band, so many groups, came out of these midwestern towns and cities, and when the concept of SoundScan came in, those cities basically stopped being major markets in the eyes of the industry. So the first nail that I want to talk about in the coffin tonight was SoundScan. Recently, John, what got me thinking about this subject, inspired me, was John Mellencamp. I understand he doesn't like to be referred to as Cougar anymore. But John Mellencamp was talking about SoundScan and how he felt that that's what killed rock. And I found that to be a very interesting conversation. I didn't know that, I don't pay attention that much, but apparently, John, in the comments section of that video I was watching, John Mellencamp is not exactly well regarded. Apparently, his audience has soured on him through some of his shenanigans. I'm sure it has to do with his politics or something. I found that very interesting, but um, he's another person that came out of Indiana. My understanding is the people of Indiana aren't particularly fond of him. And my also another thing that I looking into this and researching this tonight is finding out that John Mellencamp hates his um, Jack and Diane days. He hates the song Jack and Diane. He hates what was that other song he had? Something else he had. He hates his big hits. He doesn't like them. He doesn't like playing them. He doesn't like singing them. He kind of rejects that image of himself and said it was too commercial, but then he turned around and was a spokesperson for Ford. So, so I think that's one of the reasons why people are like, I don't know about old John. There's no boys stomping groups anymore. Yeah, when deregulation happened, the second nail in the coffin, radio stopped being local. Sorry, my cat's meowing. Um, Rock didn't disappear because people stopped liking it. Rock disappeared because the industry really actually stopped measuring it. Stopped measuring it in terms of the changes that they made with SoundScan and the old rules. and the changes that deregulation of Scott, you were talking about bringing in pirate radio. Pirate radio used to be such a big thing back in the 90s. And I don't even, and I think that they've got that all pretty much well figured out where something like that can't occur anymore either. I don't know, but it just seems to me like all of the exits are now being bricked up. So, what is SoundScan? Just quickly to remind some of you guys, if you're not familiar with it, before 1991, Billboard charts were based on a few criteria: radio station reports, in terms of how many plays they were doing in that market. Record store reports, which showed the amount of albums and then later on CDs that were being sold, and a lot of influence from the label themselves, from you know promotions to payola, from P to P, that they were involved in. And so, if a label wanted to push a song, they could do it. And some would say that this system was messy because the labels could pale their way to whoever they wanted to bring to the top. I'm looking at you, Mariah Carey, but or even better, J Lo. But it was messy, but it was a system that was equal in all markets. Not one market was treated any different than the other. It was a one for one system. One play equal 1 point. So there was that. Then SoundScan arrived, and suddenly charts became based on actual point of sale data, what people actually bought. So you couldn't. It made it difficult for the old version of payola. There's a new version of it now, of course, to succeed. Also, you couldn't, bribe the program director at WKRP to, goose your numbers with a, dinner, you know, the gifts that they would lavish on these guys for favors. All that stuff went out the window. And that sounds like a good thing, you would think. And it's funny, when they do these things, it's never for more than just one reason. It always covers a multitude of sins, and this one is no different. So all that sounds good, but SoundScan rewarded the big markets, the big retailers, and the big music chains. Okay, so it threw off that 1 to 1. John Mellencamp was saying that a market like New York would get 5 points, whereas they used to just get one per play. Whereas a place like Indianapolis, you'd only get a half. You'd only be considered a half a point. That's how skewed off it went. It went from 1 to 1 in all markets to plus, a lot of plus in some, and some, maybe some little subtraction in others. And it just so happened that those key markets that subtraction was occurring, where it wasn't the old system, was the places where a lot of R&B and a lot of rock groups came out of. So rock bands in the Midwest could sell out a venue in the Midwest and move a lot of records in that region. But if they didn't sell in LA or New York, then they weren't charting nationally. You know, it's the old story. Oh man, that we almost made. We were selling out, and we were getting offered deals, and we got, and, but we just didn't take off. It's there was a fix in, you know, that occurred. And the Midwest, the birthplace of, you know, a lot of great rock groups, a lot of great R&B groups, was the victim. And I think it was designed really honestly, to try to take some of the steam out of that market because they wanted to drive it in another direction. Benny Larson, evening. How you doing, Benny? Good to have you here, sir. So there's that. Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis. These were rock cities, and and R&B cities. They weren't just fans; they were the identity of the music, whether it be rock or Motown, for example. If you're in Detroit, you took a certain amount of pride in saying that that band is a hometown band, you know, or this music is produced here in this town. Took a lot of pride in that because that was basically thumbing your nose at both coasts, saying, "Hey, we're here in the middle, but we're the ones that are making a big impact on what people are listening to." Bands didn't start in LA or New York. Later on, in the 80s, when these Midwesterners started coming to LA and forming groups, I would still say that the DNA of those groups were still in other places other than LA. They weren't necessarily a homegrown thing out of LA and New York. And because rock was really born in the working class industrial cities of the United States, just like jazz in the early 20th century, and later on rock and R&B, as I said. But SoundScan essentially made those cities invisible, insignificant, and therefore culturally insignificant because the charts changed. Um, and the way that the charts were formed was changed. Um, National chains became an integral part of SoundScan and their cohabitation with them. Big city sales really, you know, blew the Midwest sales because of the point system, the way things were charting, and also, quite frankly, just the sheer number of populations that you would have in the big cities as opposed to some of those other ones. And of course, the major retail outlets supported this as well. You know, Tower Records, or whatever. And if you were a rock band that sold 50,000 records in Detroit, in that scenario, it didn't matter. The marketing money, the advertising money is only going to chase where the numbers that they read tell them to chase. It was no longer in the Midwest, it became the coast. So all of that advertising dollars and all that money went to the coast. And Billboard, by making that deal with SoundScan, was looking at a completely different market. And a lot of rock bands didn't know it. A lot of people didn't understand that once that deal was done, and that's what John Cougar was saying, his friend was involved in that deal. He said, once that deal was done, he told John, you're finished. You're finished. And he was right. Now they knew this. The guy says, "Hey, if I do this, then this group of people are finished." Well, this obviously was a group that you didn't feel was worth protecting or maybe not doing this deal, or maybe making this deal a little bit more attractive so that this group can hang on. No, it was a systematic pushing out. It was, oh, that's it for that, guys. Next. It was a wiping. It wasn't even pulling the the tablecloth, and leaving everything in place. Now it was throwing everything off, just getting rid of it. So there's that, and there's just no arguing that. I grew up close to um, St. Louis, so I spent a lot of time going to concerts there. Michael says, "Yeah, I've been there. I've been to St. Louis. Oh, 3 times in my life. My college girlfriend's father was there, so she was there. So I went one time to go over that. Remember that, and it was a pretty nice city. I remember it being a really nice place, but it was a musical place. Music was in the air. I don't know if that's true anymore. You know, radio. Before the changes in the 90s, radio spins, as I was alluding to, were weighted equally. One spin equals 1 point. That's what John Mellencamp was pointing out. True, it's true. Everybody knew. They should know this. But then the point per play system changed with SoundScan. A spin in New York or LA became worth 5 points. Now, the charts weren't really being based on what was being played, they were based on where it was being played. And that is one of the key drivers to why rock and classical R&B, I'll call it, is out the door, and rap suddenly took off because those were primarily urban markets in the big cities, in the radio stations. And a lot of the advertising money went in that direction. And that's when you saw rap just take off because the it had the financial machine behind it that rock used to have. They said, we're going to take this power, that this genre has, and we're going to, switch it over to this genre. And urban stations in New York and LA, again, as a result of that, they're already heavy with rap, the beginning of rap and R&B. So this became the dominant chart force. You saw that in the mid. By the time that I started working for Babyface back in '93, um, and Motown and all those other studios I worked at in LA, the money was there because all of a sudden you could feel that the money was there. There was money there. Um, and people were investing in it. And I realize now that that boom, I was in the right place at the right time. It very rarely happens with me. But that boom occurred because of this. Because of this. And as time went on, that focus became less on classical R&B, I'll call it, and more towards rap and all its various, formats, because rapper was cheaper to produce. A rap album was cheaper to produce than an R&B album. If you listen to an album like an Anita Baker album, that she got a $500 advance from the record company. She says, I spent $500,000 making that album. A rap album these days budget, I read somewhere, is between 50 to 100,000. That's not a lot of money. That's on the low end. If you are Kendrick Lamar, guys like that, then it's a little bit more. But the truth is that the production budgets aren't there. They're just not there. So that's why rap knocked knocked R&B out. Cheaper to produce. Cheaper to produce. Our group. That's why St. Louis hockey team is the Blue Notes. Yep, that's right. They do love their blues. Yeah, yes, yeah. Beagle Street. Is that Memphis or is that St. Louis? Anyway, it's been too long. But it is a musical place for sure. You feel it. So the deregulation then comes in. So poop was SoundScan, and the thing that really just knock you out was deregulation. The Communication Act and deregulation um, took away local radio. Local radio, it took away. It'll show you what a devious, bastard Bill Clinton was. All the way around. I'm sure that he profited from it because he was the type of dude, who he if it was in it for some in it for him, then he was for it. But they were able to convince him to pass this legislation, which got rid of local radio. WKRP. That's the day that WKRP died. There was a episode of WKRP in Cincinnati that talked about them being bought from or Johnny Fever going to work for a radio station that was the programming wasn't done by him. It was done out in New York, and he just pushed a button and pushed play and was a personality. And they just said, "This is we could never allow this to happen. This is the end of things." This is 1979, 70, 80. And within a few years, exactly that happened. Instead of 100 local stations with 100 local tastes, one local station is going to fit the taste of the area that it serves, the community that it serves. Ain't everybody going to be playing Britney Spears, okay? It doesn't work that way, or it didn't work that way. But when deregulation through via the Communications Act occurred, then everybody was listening to Britney whether they wanted to or not. You had 5 corporations that were controlling everything, and local DJs were replaced, and the music became homogenized. And even if a rock group was big in Detroit, didn't matter. They didn't have the local radio support anymore in order to push them onto the net, get them the kind of attention that they needed to move on to the national level because the stations were no longer local. You see how insidious it is? It is, again, no exaggeration to say that this created a huge cultural shift. That's why guys like me, my age, we can remember pre-cultural shift to where it is now, and we know the difference. Because we lived it. It was a clear cut, night and day kind of situation. LA radio, even in a big market LA, you had local stations, you know, like K Rock and some of the other ones like Dr. Demento show. What was that came on? I forget the station they came on. I used to listen, and that would never occur now. Unless became that it was a local thing, and then people began to make tapes of it and send it to their cousins somewhere, and then it got that's how Weird Al Yankovic got his start, was on the Dr. Demento show, because people started passing his songs around. That's the power of what local radio had. And deregulation, Communications Act killed that. No local radio means no regional charts, means no regional touring support, means no place for rock to build any momentum, or an R&B group for that matter. It became a subculture instead of the mainstream culture. And that's what we see it as today. Rock is alive. I'm not saying it's dead. You see all these YouTube, oh, rock is dead, rock is dead. It's not dead. I'm trying to put together an album of rock songs. So it's not, I'm not dead. I still have a pulse. So certainly, it just stopped being what the industry wanted to measure. The Communications Act, that deregulation that occurred with that, um, SoundScan, and some would include in this the signing of private prisons in the United States. I've heard the story so many times from so many different people of varying degrees of credibility in my mind that I have come to the conclusion that is absolutely true. That private prisons and record companies got in cahoots with each other to promote violent rap music in order to serve each other. If the culture is out there listening to violent things, then they're going to create violent situations that are going to fill our prisons. I believe that that is again, when they do these things, it covers a multitude of sins that they want to you know they want to get into. It's not just one thing, and it does, and it's that's the insidiousness of it. Because if you start pointing to one thing, they say, yeah, but this thing over here was going on too. Well, yeah, that was part of it as well. So the big question then becomes: was this change inevitable? Was this just an inevitability, or was this a deliberate industry shift? SoundScan, I remember it when it first came out, was marketed as transparency. And I have learned over the years that whenever governments or anybody starts talking about we're doing it for transparency, it's like no child left behind. Well, children were left behind. We're doing it for transparency, where it just becomes completely opaque. It's the opposite of what they say it is. And SoundScan was really sold as being transparency, but it also created a new way of controlling the charts. And deregulation was marketed as freeing up the airwaves. Well, how are you going to free up something which was free anyway enough by narrowing it down to just five people who are controlling that, five organizations, companies that are controlling that? That's ridiculous. They turned it into a corporate product. So the real question is, the industry decide that rock was no longer profitable and then change the system to make that true? I wonder. I really do wonder. Scott says, why were 80s and 90s TV show theme tunes so much better than the 2000s? Most were actual songs. Yeah, I'm watching Beverly Hills 90210, and I hate the fact that I know now that the guitar, which by the way, it was a song that was the guitar was the featured song, instrument. Try finding that these days. And they re-recorded it between season 3 and 4. And the fact that I know that, but I will say that it is a way better musical piece of music than, as Scott was just saying, than a lot of the stuff I'm hearing now, like the theme for Stranger Things. It's all moody synth pop, in my opinion. I don't know what you're saying, Nyamadada 3372. I don't remember you saying hi. Said hi means that you previously gave a greeting. If you want to say hi, you're asking me to give you a greeting. So I'm not quite too sure what you're saying there. Um, I'm sorry, I'm being my teacher mode. SoundScan helped kill rock, not by killing the music. They couldn't do that. They just killed the mechanism that supported it and put that eye of Siron onto rap. Deregulations made it so that rock could never rebuild again. It was a 1-2 punch. Looking into this, researching this to write this script, reading some of the articles of the time, and just formulating an opinion, I am of the opinion after this research into it that it was the program. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why. I don't know, what would be the purpose of killing the golden calf, the golden goose. I'm sorry. Why would you kill the golden goose? I don't know. That's the one answer I don't have, you know. So again, rock didn't die. It was just made invisible. And I think that as a result of that control that SoundScan and deregulation gave to the big cities, to the major urban markets, I think that it was to our detriment. The matter, I don't think, I know it is. I throw R&B, classical R&B in there again because, like I said, you don't have the multitude of R&B groups, female groups, male groups, solo, artists that you had in that period of time now. Rap is falling off as well. Uh, but rap had that diversity to it that R&B used to have. However, again, it's just there was some great rap music that came out. Don't get me wrong, but I think that the best rap music that came out was before this deregulation occurred. Because even then, De La Soul was was you know was a product of a particular area that they lived, and a lot of groups came out of that area as well. Again, and that was a microcosm. It wasn't being directed to and told what was good by some massive corporate system. There was a lot of influences because there was a lot of independent radio stations that these guys were listening to. So a lot of these early rappers, they created these albums because they were listening to everything. And these are masterpieces. Again, you fast forward now, you know, to mumble rap and, you know, and drill rap and all those other things, and you have just fallen off the cliff in terms of anything. There's nothing there. It generates a lot of money, but it's empty calories. Empty calories. And this is, you know, the rise of pop and rap in the 90s and R&B. But you see how that went as well. They said, well, this rap stuff is sure a lot less, expensive to do than that last Whitney Houston album. Why don't we start focusing more on signing more of this stuff? And then, because we signed this guy, we gave him a check for $50,000 and we made, 10 million off of him last week. And we're still telling him he hasn't recouped yet. But it's true. It's true because they're mad. These guys, a lot of these guys they're they were the most brilliant guys in the room when it comes to negotiating their contracts. So, just something to think about, guys, something to chew on. Cat's Music Journey. How you doing, sir? Good to have you here. Yeah, just something to chew on. It blew my mind because, I was like, first of all, I was like, wow, that's John Cougar Mellencamp. I haven't seen that dude in about 40 years. And he certainly looks like it's been 40 years. And one of us has been out in the sun a lot more than the other. But I was listening to what he was saying about, you know, this about what killed rock music. And I said, that's interesting because you always hear, of course, about the Communications Act. That's pretty old hat. People pretty much have already figured that out. But linking that with SoundScan, then you begin to see in some of the other stories on the periphery, then you begin to see how this was a organized and systematic takedown of that genre. Again, I'm not 100% sure why. Again, you would kill the golden goose because it was generating a lot of money. But I think that the power of social control or social conditioning is far more attractive to those who seek power than money. I think in the end, the ability to change people's perception and have that kind of power is a lot more important than generating profits for some people. Profits actually would be a secondary thing. Just a thought, just something I thought I would throw out there. All right, guys. Not even going to lie to you. I wrote the script to be around 50 minutes. We are now at 47 minutes, so I was short about 3 minutes in my writing. I owe you guys 3 minutes worth of writing. I have to get up early tomorrow, so I am not even going to do a full hour here tonight. But I thought this was such an interesting topic to talk about, even in this short amount of time we're doing here tonight, that that it was worth doing and worth getting into. Reminder, guys, the printer emailed me today and said that the CD is next in the queue. So he'll print those out. He's in Rotterdam. He's going to print them out and then send them to me, and then we'll be getting those out. So that's definitely happened. If you pre-order on that, you have not done so in vain. I will be sending out an email when it's all put together and saying, this is ready to go. So just an update on the CD, guys. Um, I will see you on Sunday, and I hope that you guys take care. I'm going to go directly to bed. I'm going to do a Superman, get out of these clothes, get my PJs, and go to bed. And you guys have a nice one. I will see you this weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye.